And we're live.
Hello, hello, everyone. We're a little late because we were having such a good play with our conversation before.
We always do. I think there's probably we should, going forward, Brooke, I was thinking we should record what happens before we go live.
We should.
That there's a lot of weird conversation that people may
But
call.
some of them are sort of
Some of
interesting.
them
I
are
feel like
interesting.
people would want to be a fly on the wall during them.
I think we should probably record them at a different time. But let's go forward with that.
So I'm
How was
excited. We were
your
having
how
a
was
play
your
with a
Memorial
bunch of
Day?
stuff, and we were talking about Memorial Day. And you want to be the life of the party, you could talk about estate planning.
We could talk about estate plan. Yeah. So if you wanna be kicked out of a party, talk about
If
do you
you
have
want to
wills and
leave
trusts.
a Memorial
Yeah.
Day party, now I didn't want to leave a Memorial Day party, but let's say you do. You could start talking about estate planning. You'll get kicked out real fast.
Yeah. So I think if you're getting bored at a party and you don't want to offend the host, the thing you said is, hey, do you have an estate plan? You will be shown the door pretty soon. But I think in all seriousness, though, it's a very, very important topic, right? And as I reflect back on, I've been thinking about what's that one thing that if I were to say, if I could do one thing right in life, what would that be? For my family, for myself, for anyone that I'm leaving behind after I pass away. What's that one thing going to be? It's not going to be now all of them are important. Anything that I go with, they're all important,
Mhm.
but they're not equally important, right? Leave them money, leave them house, leave them assets, leave them values. All of them are very important.
Right.
But if you have young kids, when I say young kids, minor, below 18, what you need to do today, if you don't have it, is to go get yourself an estate planning lawyer and establish a living trust, not even a will. Go establish a living trust, right? And we can go into the details of that. I see a lot of my own friends. Now I did that myself. I procrastinated that for 5 years. It's not an excuse. It's not a acceptable excuse.
And
So
it's
I
not fun.
understand that.
And we
It's not fun.
emphasize with that too. Nobody really wants to think about that, but I think it's crucial too.
It is.
Even if it is not the most exciting thing to think about, just think about it briefly. And then after you get it done, you can set it aside.
Completely agree. I think nobody wants to think about death, especially as an immigrant. At least I can talk about coming from India. If I talk to my parents, they've since passed away. That hey, have you thought about your will? They're like, do you want me to die? Right. That's the
Mhm.
initial reaction that you get from them. But if you think about it, at least in this country, we'll talk about the U.S. I know the audience is broader than the U.S., but even in the U.S., if you have forget about your money. We'll talk about that as well. But if you have kids below 18 and you pass away without a will or without a living trust, your kids are going to go into foster care. There is no ifs and buts about it. Now, you may be able to figure out a way to get them out of the foster care, your relatives or whoever. Now, if you're leaving a spouse behind, that's a different thing. But if your spouse and you are both to gone away, your kid there's no other choice but your child or your children will become the ward of the state, right? So part of that thing is, do you want to do that? Yeah, you may have left them with $1 million or $1 billion, but they won't be able to access it because they will be pushed off to strangers, right? And that may take some time. That may take a week. That may take a 6 month. That may take 6 weeks, depending upon which state you're in, how everything is sorted out. So if you have young kids, minor kids, you don't have to plan to die, but you have to make sure that you've appointed a caretaker who's going to be
Mhm.
their guardian, that that can adopt them at that point, basically, or take care of them after you and your spouse may have gone away, right? That's really what.
Mhm.
And if you're leaving one of the spouses, that's fine, because if the one of the parents is alive, they're going to do basically take care of them. That's an easier part, but you have no control, right? If you're taking a vacation to Hawaii or New York or wherever you want to go, and the plane crashes, now it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, right? And you may be an unfortunate one who ends up being on that plane, not by choice, just by accident. What happens then, right? So I think one thing that I would say is that pay attention to this conversation. And I'm not an estate planning lawyer, but I've talked to over 100 lawyers when I was looking at my estate plan. And for those of you who know me, I don't do anything just by talking to one person. I want to understand everything about it before I do it. So I'm very well versed with why it's needed, what's this needed, and how do you structure it an ideal way versus structure it in a way that makes sense to make sure that everyone can get through it. So
Mhm.
I think the way to look at this whole thing is from, and I'm going to say something which is going to come across very insensitive, like you pay attention to your finances, like you're saying I need life insurance or this and that, you need to look at your kids as assets as well, right? Especially when you're gone. You need to have somebody manage that asset. It's a very insensitive way of looking at it, but that's the easiest way to think about estate planning. You have two kind of assets in your life. You have a financial asset, and you have your kids as an asset, and your spouse as well. But that's fine. They're adults, right? So they're a little bit more independent in that. Hopefully, you have other assets, other financial assets that's going to help them take care of it. But if no one's taking care of your minor kids, that's probably the asset that's way more important than, do I want to be in a stock market? Do I want to be in real estate? A lot of us put a lot more emphasis on that because it's sexy conversation, right?
Mhm.
My Tesla went up by 1,000%, or my real estate portfolio is doubled in value in 2 months. It's a sexier conversation, which I understand that I'm all about it. But the thing is, there are two different assets, and an estate plan is the only plan in this country, at least in the US. I can't speak for others. I'm pretty sure it's similar to for other countries as well. Estate plan is the only way you can transition this world peacefully, knowing that you have put a plan to help to help take care of those assets, right?
Mhm.
So Brooke, as you hear that, of course, I know that at this point in your life you don't have kids. So as you think forward about it, what questions are coming to you? Because it'll be a good exercise of, I don't know if you have an estate plan, but your reasoning may be very different because you're in a different phase of life right now.
Absolutely. And, as you're talking, this was actually an open conversation that we had, obviously, me and my sisters when we were young. Who would you want to go to? Because I think that's a big
Hmm.
thing, having that open conversation. Who would you want to be your caregiver? It was not actually, in my case, the closest relative. It was actually someone
Yeah.
very, very different. And we did have those open conversations around which girl would want the land and what girl would want the house. And
Right.
this was obviously when we were teenagers. When we were younger, that was not the case, but we did have those open conversations. And I'm really, really grateful for those, that we had those when we were so young, because we could understand if there ever were to be a tragic accident.
Hmm.
We actually wanted to go to different people, and that was
Yeah.
completely fine. For me, actually, yeah, I do. And that goes to my younger sister. So I think it's important, if you don't have children, who do you want your things to go to? Why
Right.
do you want that to be the case? Do you want to divvy it up in percentages? Do you want to have it all go to one or to two or three or four? So it is absolutely something I'm thinking about. And I know that the way that child free people, single people, unpartnered people do it is incredibly different. But that
Hmm.
doesn't mean it's not still incredibly important, because you don't want that
Correct.
to go through probate. You don't want that to go through, you know, through the state. You want it to go to your direct relatives.
100%. So let's talk about, you said a lot of different things there, but you said one word there, probate. So let's actually talk about, forget about kids for a second,
Yeah.
because we've talked at length on that. So why is an estate plan necessary? So what happens when you pass away? When you and your spouse pass away? We'll talk together because you both are the caretakers of your finances, right? If that happens, if you don't have a will, or if you don't have a living trust, the state, wherever you live in, they don't know who the creditors are, right? They have no idea about your finances. So they're gonna publish. It's gonna go through a process called probate, probate. All that means is the courts making sure that there are no pending creditors that don't need to be paid, or there are no more claims to your estate, right? So
Mhm.
it's giving the opportunity for folks, for the institutions, for the banks, or whoever the creditor could be, to come and make a claim against it. That doesn't mean they're going to get paid, but they can claim it, right? And that process not only is lengthy, but it's very expensive. So
And
if
you
you're living
lose
in
so
a
much value.
if you're living in a state, and Third, it's very, very public. So let's talk about that, all these three process, these three things. And one is it's public, which essentially
Mhm.
means that you may have built a great moat around your financial assets while you were living, while you and your spouse were living, and nobody knew what your assets were because you protected it through anonymity. The moment it goes through probate, everything that you have is going to become public. Now,
Mhm.
what's the risk in that? The risk in that is if, let's say, you're leaving teenage kids behind, let's say 40-year-old kids behind. Now, everyone in the world will know what is Brooke or her sister or Saket or her siblings are inheriting, right?
Mhm.
So
Which
you
is
not
very
only make
dangerous.
very dangerous as a 30, 40-year-old kid, you are now telling I just inherited 5, 10, 15, $20 million or even $1 million.
Especially
Doesn't
for an
matter.
unmarried person, and I wanna bring this up because this is
Very
relevant, and
important.
I have a lawyer who has had this conversation with me. If you're an unmarried person and that were to happen to you, you put
Yeah.
yourself at risk for being scammed or phished or something of that nature, romantically.
Very true. Very true. People are all of a sudden you're going to see, yeah, everyone's approaching you, right? Man or woman
Mhm.
doesn't matter, right? It's immaterial.
Mhm.
It's they're attracted more towards your financial wealth rather
Yes,
than what you as a person have to offer, right? And you don't want your kids to go through that. So first of
absolutely
all,
not.
is you want to protect it being from going through probate because of public nature of that. Second is
Mhm.
it's lengthy, right?
Mhm.
In the state of California, it could take up to 18 months to 6 years, depending on what your assets are. So, what
Mhm.
does that mean? Right. So, let's say your kids are 20, 30 years old kids. They're fully matured in their thinking, and you feel comfortable that at that point they could have taken care of your wealth. Perfect, but they can't access any of that for 18 months to 6 years, right? Some cases, that's not all, but at least 6 months in most states. Most
Mhm.
states, you can't access that money. I'll give you an example of a person, a very good friend of mine. Her husband passed away. She could not access her bank accounts or anything, his bank account, because they were not joined on it. So in his
And they
mind,
probably weren't POD'd.
right. So a lot of that was, I know the first instruction that was given to her by another friend of mine was withdraw as much cash as you can from the bank today, right now. Stop crying. The first thing you need to may do is run to the bank, 20, 30, 40,000, whatever you can take out, just take out. Because the moment bank knows that this person has passed away, they're going to freeze their assets because it's
Mhm.
not part of the will, it's not part of the trust. They're doing it to protect the person, right? They're not doing it with an ill
Mhm.
motive, the wrong motive. So your assets are there. The third thing is in some states, again, California, New York being the notorious ones, the estate lawyer, to because you need to hire a lawyer to make sure the probate process goes smoothly, that's a percentage of your asset value. So if you're leaving $20 million, $10 million, $1 million, you're giving 8 to 10% to a lawyer at that point, right?
Mhm.
So if you think about these three things in itself, it should give you motivation enough to start thinking about estate planning. Forget about kids for a second. Kids are the most important reason, but maybe you don't have the kids, maybe you're not there yet, maybe your kids are grown up, but then
Even
think about
nieces and
these.
nephews, there's a lot of
Right.
anyone that you want to go to for whatever reason.
Correct. So now let's think about how do you make it non-public and how do you avoid probate? So there's
Mhm.
usually two ways to set up an estate plan. You can go do a living will or you can get a living trust. L- For there's a lot of confusion around those two. They're not the
Mhm.
same. They're not the same. Will is just a document which tells people if I pass away, who gets the assets and what's the distribution and all that good stuff. While you can specify there who is going to be the guardian for your kids, right? So you've checked that one box, but everything else of the probate is still there with the will. Will still go through the probate, right? It's cheaper right now to get a will. You can get a will to the lawyer for like $1,000. Don't quote me on the pricing. It could be different for depending upon your own situation,
Oh,
but you can get
Ohio
it
runs 750.
750. There you go. So just move to Ohio, get it done, and move back. But the second approach is putting a living trust. Let's understand the concept of a living trust. I'm going to K through 5 it for you guys. Living trust is an unborn child. The way to look at this, unborn person. It's an unborn person who doesn't have an existence until you die, right? And the moment you die, that person becomes 20 years old, 21 years old. It doesn't stay as a 1 year old, right? So it becomes a living, breathing person. Entity is the right word. Living, breathing entity. And whatever is staying in that entity, because that entity never dies, it's essentially making sure that it doesn't, that because that ownership structure never dissolved, right? So
Mhm.
everything that you had is now going to go to the living will, living trust. So and the trust never dies in most states. In some states, the trust has a length of life,
And
but
we
it's way
encourage you to
past
research, your own state.
100%.
That's what I told a dear
100%.
friend who's getting married. She said, "Oh, we're not doing a prenup." I said, "Honey, when you get married in the state, you're essentially signing the state's prenup. So
You
look at
are
your state's rules."
correct. 100%. So now what we're saying is that, okay, living trust is the perfect route because living trust avoids probate. So the living will avoids guardianship issues for your kids. But what about probate? It cannot avoid probate. So what can avoid probate is the living trust. Living trust can avoid all of that stuff. Right? Now there's a lot more things that goes with will and living trust. Well, I
Mhm,
would definitely encourage you to go to living trust. Here's one of the big reasons why. Let's say you're leaving $1 million behind, right? Or let's say living a five, or let's say $10 million. It's an easier number to because by the time the nature of our show is hopefully everyone's in that zone by the time they're passing away, but we don't have control. But that's the plan. If you were to go through probate and you were to give 8 to 10% to of your asset value to a lawyer, you're giving away $1 million,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Giving away $1 million because you didn't want to put an extra you didn't want to get to establish a living trust. You said, I'm going to save the money to set up a living trust, to set up a will. Let's think about the cost differences between the two. Like Brooks said, 750, maybe cheaper in some states, maybe a little bit more expensive. Let's round the number $1,000. A living trust will be about $5,000 approximately for most of us, unless your estate is very, very complicated and you need to go a lot of back and forth, right? Usually it's going to be somewhere around $4,000 to $5,000. So let's say five. So we're seeing a delta of $4,000, right? Now, I'm not passing a judgment of anyone's financial situations. So if you have to make a choice because you don't have the money today, get the living will to start with. But
Mhm,
if you can afford $4,000 and $5,000 and you have to sacrifice 1 year's worth of vacation to do that, it's probably you are going to leave your kids in a much safer hand, your spouse in a much safer hand, and you're going to die more peacefully, right? Because at
mhm,
some point when you're transitioning, you don't worry about you didn't do any X, Y, and Z. And I'll tell you, I don't know, most of you may know that I got kidnapped in India at gunpoint about 13 years ago. The thought that was going behind my head was my wife doesn't know anything about where the money is, where it's sitting. I've not left the passwords behind. I was less worried about me dying potentially, but more stressed about, well, she's going to be in a mess financially, because I've put some structures in place that she has no idea about, right? So you don't want to. So I've lived that emotion. I've lived that emotion, so I can tell you it's not the thing that you want to think about when you are taking your last breath. You want to leave happy, peaceful, in whatever state you can, right? But not about worries. That's the last emotion I would hope anyone would have to go through. If
mhm,
finances are your worry, the only way to address it is to help them. Whatever you have, you could have a dollar, you could have a $10 billion. It doesn't matter to me. That's not the value of, hey, it's only for rich people. It's not. It's for anybody. So that's
mhm,
really what I would say is that living will versus living trust. Living trust is the way to go,
mhm,
right? If you can afford it. If you can't afford it, and you're not ready to make some cuts and sacrifices, at least get the will because especially if you have kids, at least that.
mhm,
And having a will and not having a will, the probate looks very different. If you have a will, the probate's much faster. It's still expensive, but it's going to be much faster, right? So at least you've put some measures in place where you're able to go through that process in a much more efficient manner, right?
mhm,
So will is going to be helpful. Is it? But is it the best solution? No, it's not. It's not at
mhm.
all. right? So that's really where I know it's a very boring topic. It's a topic we're talking about morbidity, which actually, if you know me by now, I talk about death a lot because that's the only way you can get people moving in the right direction. Because if
Mhm,
you're not aware of your mortality, you think you have lifetimes left to do what you really want to do, but you don't, right? So it's important to remember that we all are mortal. That doesn't mean we are wishing to death for the death to come tomorrow. That's not the goal. The goal
mhm,
is that we're prepared if it comes because we have no control on that. So in this
mhm,
case, what I would say is that the topic was very, I chose that topic. When Brooke and I were talking, we could go in 20 different directions. Like, you know what? If I were to say what's one thing that's most important that I didn't do when I should have done it, is going to be get your affairs in order. Not when you have $1 million. Doesn't matter. It's when you are when you're even when you're starting out, because if you're it's like building a chassis, right? If you build a body, if you build a chassis for a truck, for a car, you can put anything on top of it. And the foundation is strong, you can keep
mhm,
loading on weight on it. Right now most of us don't have that chassis, but we're trying to grow a skyscraper on top of it. So get a foundation. This estate plan acts as a foundation. And then one thing that most people make a mistake, for all the listeners, is you have to, if you're setting up a living trust, you have to make sure you're transferring the assets in living trust name. Most people skip that step, and if you skip that step, there's no point spending $5,000. You're
mhm.
basically
To
going to have
whoever
gone.
you choose, whether that's nephew or sister or brother or children, doesn't matter. But make sure you know what is going where.
What is going where, and if you have bank accounts need to be in the name of the trust. Right? It cannot be in your personal name, because the moment it stays in your personal name, it becomes as if you didn't know what to do with it. It's going to go through a probate process again. So then
Mhm.
spending $5,000 would have been a moot point anyways, right? So that's
Yeah.
one extra step. So your lawyer, do yourself a favor, do not go to LegalZoom to do your estate plan. Do not do that. That's probably going
Mhm,
to be the most important document that you will ever sign on, and you need to make
mhm,
sure that you have thought about it. I'm more than happy to talk to you about how I've structured mine. Right, a lot of that is the different ways to structure your living trust, the different philosophies that people have. You could do the way Rockefellers did it versus Vanderbilt did it, right? And I know we're running short on time here, but very quickly, Rockefeller did not let any of the inheritees take the principal out of the trust.
mm,
They could live off the interest. Interest could be distributed anytime they wanted to, but nobody could touch the principal. Why would they do that? Because what they did there is the principal is invested in assets that's giving the money to feed to basically be benefited for the next generation, right?
mhm,
And if you know the principle of compounding, if you
mhm.
let that principal compound at even 8%, that's a lot of money towards the end. At 7%, you're doubling every 7 years, at every 10 years. So if let's say you pass one generation, right, and they've lived for 90 years, so you're now saying 2 to the power 9 is the multiple you're applying on whatever you left them with.
And additionally, that ensures it sustains more than 3 generations, because most wealth
Completely.
is lost in 3 generations.
I mean, look at Vanderbilt's. They were one of the wealthiest people in the world. Now their wealth has completely dissipated,
It
because they
is.
chose to take the principle and develop a lifestyle, versus Rockefellers. They still have maintained their whole wealth, right? Their next
Yes, they have.
generations are even more wealthier than they were than the previous generations, is because they have put more thought about it. So there's
Yep.
different ways to structure it. A lot of people, like me and my wife, don't agree. I want to leave the principle, she wants to distribute, right? Completely different. I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong, but these are the conversations you want to have. And I would highly encourage you. We did that for our girls. We did this our statement about 5 years ago. Anytime we would have an estate conversation, we made sure consciously our girls were around. Now we didn't engage them in the conversation, but they were around there listening to me talking to the lawyers, having me and my wife making decisions. Their
Mhm,
mind will absorb eventually, right? You
mhm,
want to train the next generation. If you're 40, 50 years old today, and this is the first time you're hearing these concepts, You don't want your child to go through another 30, 40 years before they understand it. You want them
Correct.
to know now, right? So that at least in their subconscious mind, it should register. And the more they hear it, the more they'll register it. So
Right.
then when they are ready to make that action, somebody's telling them the aha moment will happen. It may not happen because
Mhm.
of you, but you implanted that seed, right? That's very, very important. And I'll give you another example for that. I talk about income statement, balance sheets with my around my girls a lot. Not because I'm a financial geek. I'm not. Although I love those statements because that they form the foundation. So we're playing a game right now where we're talking about income statement and balance sheets. So I was listening to a podcast the other day. Balance sheet was said. So both of them together in harmony said, "Can you pause the podcast? Did he just say balance sheet?" Right?
Mhm.
It was amazing to hear that they're making that connection. They may not yet understand what a balance sheet is. It doesn't matter. The
Right.
goal is not for them to become an A student. The goal is for them is when they hear a term, they can picture what that meant.
And to
Right?
normalize the conversation because so many families do not.
They do not. Right? We're talking about passive income, and they're telling me we're playing a game, Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, and my older one, we were talking about passive income. Oh my God, the connection she made, Brooke, is
Mhm.
children are amazing. And I'm not saying because they're my kid. I think every kid is can make that connection. Is we were talking about passive income, and it took us about 20 minutes to play one round or to play a certain portion of that game. So at the end of it, she's like, Papa, I have a question. I'm like, what question? She's like, why do people work like crazy? I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, if the goal is to have your passive income increase your expenses, why don't you just invest the money that you make and then you're done? I'm like, it's such an insightful comment. I don't
So
even think she
smart.
knows what she's saying yet because she's just looking at very simplistically, right?
Yeah.
Because she doesn't understand yet about expenses to the level of lifestyle creeps and everything else. She's saying all you need to do is make money and invest in opportunities that give you passive income. It's like, is
Yes.
this the reason why you're not working for anyone? I'm like, exactly.
Mhm.
I could see the next conversation. So, how much passive income do we make? Right? That was going to come the next question. I'm like, not enough yet. We got to continue making it. Right? It takes
But
care
that's
of the
good because
basic
it's
expense.
normalizing it and it's making it her everyday thought pattern.
Correct. 100%. So, just make these conversations as part of them. But before you start that, you have to get educated in what
Mhm.
you want to do. Right? So, use this conversation as a trigger point. I'm not saying I'm an expert in anything, but I know a lot of things about a lot of things that I needed to know. But there are tons of things that I don't know, right? But these are the things that I would say that every household should have a conversation about. And if you're choosing not to do that, you at that point cannot blame anybody else, right? If you're choosing to say, like in my case, I'm going to procrastinate for 5 years because, and I'll tell you why I procrastinated because I didn't want to think who's going to take care of my kids.
Right.
I couldn't comprehend it. So I'm like, let me just live in denial. That's
Mhm.
not an acceptable reason to procrastinate, right? So that's what I would leave you with. Brooke, anything to add? I know I've talked a
No, I
lot
think this is
here.
this has been fabulous. I think it's
Awesome.
been fun. I think if somebody even just wants to banter around their thoughts, they can book a call with you. Obviously their life situation could be incredibly different, but you can always book a call. Having a second unbiased is the crucial word here. Opinion is so important when you're figuring out what you want to do, even just having that sounding board. And I know you want to be that for people.
Definitely. I mean, I live for these conversations. That's why Brooke and I started for a very different reason. But this is the value that we could provide people, right? Where it's going to be more around these conversations. So I've just added a QR code below the video. So just click on that QR code or scan that QR code, and you'll be taken to my calendar. Feel free to book
Mhm.
that call. This is free, right? If I can help you make one decision in your life and only one, this is going to be the one I want to help you with of
Mhm.
what should be my estate plan or how should I structure it. It could be one of those things where you're going to reflect back 10 years from now and remember this conversation that if I didn't do that because of whatever, hopefully you'll never need it. I mean, at some point you will, because none of us are mortals. None of us is immortal. So at some point you'll need it. But hopefully by the time you need it, it's a moot point anyways because everything is in order. You've taught your kids the right way of finances and they got it, right?
Mhm.
But what if it doesn't happen that way? So for that reason, I really, really, really want to help you in establishing. I do not get paid whoever lawyer you pick. I'm not making any commissions. I don't want to make commission because this is something that's needed. So feel
Mhm.
free to set up a call.
Absolutely, and I've had fun, so I hope you have too. I know it's a dark conversation, but I've had a great time with it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Once you know it, and you have the good thing is you only have to do it once
Only once.
and you're
It's
done.
like ripping off the Band-Aid. Just rip off the
Yeah,
Band-Aid, then you can pretend it didn't happen.
definitely. Well, thank you again, Brooke. And thank you again for everyone listening. And I really hope you take the time in setting up a call or at least going with the lawyer and asking them directly. Doesn't matter which way you do it. Drop me a note if this pushed you to make that decision. If that nudge, you needed that nudge, and this conversation provided you the nudge, I would love to hear back.
Absolutely.
So keep, yeah, keep it going. I know you can do it. So keep doing it.